Stories, a book that celebrates immigrants. I'm Stephen Yale-Loehr, and with me here is Alessio Balada, who's in the book, Dr. Srisatish Devapatla, who is a doctor neonatologist at Hugo Medical Center, and Sue Chaffee, who runs the Immigrant Services Program at Ithaca Catholic Charities. We're going to talk about the book and our immigration system. So as background, I teach immigration law and asylum law at Cornell Law School. And I also practice immigration law here in Ithaca at the law firm of Miller-Mayer. I'm also often asked, how do people get green cards? What is a green card? And first I tell them, a green card is not green. If you have a green card, you know it's a counterfeit. You should get a better counterfeit one. It used to be green, which was why it used to be called green cards. But now it's laminated like your driver's license. They have all these counterfeit and holographic things in it so that it's really your own document. That's really only one part of the immigration system. Most people come into the United States on a temporary visa, or what we call a non-immigrant visa. And there's over 27 different categories, all based on letters because of where they are in the immigration statute. And so many people, millions a year actually, come in as visitors in the B visa category. And some people come to work on an H category, or maybe as a student on the F category. So there's lots of ways that you can come into the United States temporarily. And each of them have their own requirements. Some are easy to get, but only for short times, and you can't work. Others are hard to get, but once you get them, you can work for a long time. If you want to stay longer, however, then you need to think about what the immigration statute calls permanent residence, or what people colloquially call a green card. And a green card is pretty complicated. You can't really see it on the screen here, but there are several ways to get a green card. One is based on family relationships, and we'll talk about those tonight. One is based on employment characteristics. One category is based on political asylum, fleeing persecution. And we even have a category for people who come in based on a diversity green card lottery, surprisingly. So you have to figure out which way you can get in. Some of these green card categories have caps or limits, and they're backlogged. For example, if I'm a U.S. citizen and I want to bring in my fellow compatriot who's my brother or sister from the Philippines, it can take over 20 years because the backlogs are so long. Other people just can't qualify because they can't find jobs, or the political persecution is not proven to the satisfaction of the immigration agency. So it is quite hard. And nevertheless, people want to come in. Over 1 million people a year get green cards in the United States. And then typically 3 to 5 years after they get their green card, they're eligible to become naturalized U.S. citizens. So we've got the complexity about how to qualify. We also have the complexity about who does what in the immigration system. We don't have one immigration agency in the United States. We have the Department of Homeland Security. We have the Department of State. We have the Department of Labor. We have the Department of Health and Human Services, who helps people adjust if they're refugees or has foreign doctors certify whether people have contagious diseases. So you've got to figure out how to interact with all of these agencies in addition to figuring out which category you qualify in. So you've got that additional complication. Another complication is that we haven't changed our immigration laws in over 20 years. The world has changed a lot in that time period, but our laws have not. So everyone recognizes that our immigration system is broken, but so far Congress hasn't done anything to revive it, to renovate it. And the dialogue and the debate in Congress these days is very abstract. They talk about illegal aliens and whether too many people are coming into the country. But they don't talk about the human faces, the people who actually get through the system and re-energize our society. And that's why we decided to do a book called Green Card Stories. A friend of mine named Laura Danielson, who's an immigration lawyer in Minneapolis, about 15 years ago came up with a concept, but she didn't act on it. And about 4 years ago, I had dinner with her in Minneapolis, and she said, I've got this idea. And I said, let's go for it. And we contacted immigration lawyers around the country and human rights groups. And we combed newspaper articles about interesting people who got green cards. And we came up with a spreadsheet of about 250 people who came in from various countries, came in interesting ways, did interesting things after they got here, and we decided to cull that down into 50 profiles. And we call it 50 People, 5 Continents, 1 America. So, after we figured out who we wanted to include in the book, we decided to hire a very good photojournalist named Ariana Lindquist, who works half-time in China and half-time in the United States. She's won some international awards. And we got a nationally renowned journalist named Sandra Amrein to help us also figure out how to put these pictures and these stories together in a meaningful way. And they spent the better part of a year going around the United States, from Seattle to Florida and Maine to California, figuring out which people should be in our book. And the consequence is green card stories. It is the face of immigration today. It shows the remarkable stories of people and how they survived the immigration gauntlet to get a green card, and what happened to them after they came into this country. So, this book shows that despite the complexities of our immigration system, we have some remarkable people coming to the United States. And I want to talk about them, and we'll also have our panelists talk about their own experiences here. This first slide is Farah Bala. She was raised by a single mother in India, where divorce was taboo. And to escape her broken family life, she immersed herself in the world of theater. She began acting in school plays, and she eventually won a full scholarship to attend Sarah Lawrence University, where she majored in acting. She graduated, and after she got her bachelor's degree, she started teaching acting to inner-city kids in New York City. And that led a way for her to get a green card based on her extraordinary ability in motivating these inner-city children to learn acting. She actually was supposed to come here tonight, but she got an acting gig, so. But at least you can see her face. She's a very, very good actor. Next we have Thupten Lama. He's a monk from Tibet originally, who was living in exile in India. And when mobs attacked his house, because of his religious beliefs, he fled to Minnesota with a lot of other Tibetans. And there he obtained political asylum. And today he teaches Americans how to become Buddhists. And his goal is to become a naturalized U.S. citizen before he dies, so that when he comes back, reincarnated his next life, he will come back as a U.S. citizen. And that's very important to him, because this is the one place where he could practice his religion without fear of persecution. And so he's very happy, and that's him in his house there. There's sort of a Tibetan shrine there. It's a wonderful place. Next we have Lena Thao. She is from Laos, and her family came to Minnesota as refugees. They were part of the Hmong, who helped the CIA in the secret war there, and they had to flee when the communists took over. And her family settled first in Minnesota, and then moved down to Arkansas, where they started a chicken farm. And she did not particularly like raising chickens. And one day, in her hometown in Arkansas, she stopped by a mixed martial arts facility and went inside and sort of fell in love with mixed martial arts. And you know, and a Laotian woman just does not do mixed martial arts. But she became very good, and she eventually convinced her parents that that was more important to her than to get married to a Laotian man and be a chicken farmer. And now she's a professional, and she goes around the country as a female mixed martial arts person. Next we have Dr. Randolph Seeley. He was originally born in the Caribbean, and his grandparents raised him in the Bronx, in the inner city there, and he always considered himself American. He didn't even know anything about his immigration status until when it came time to apply for college. And he realized he didn't have a Social Security card. And he asked his grandparents about it, and they sort of hemmed and hawed, and they said, well, you know what? Actually, you came in on a tourist visa when you were 8 years old, and then you overstayed your tourist visa, so now technically you're undocumented, you're illegal. And he was very upset because he considered him just as American as anybody else. His favorite baseball team was the Yankees. But he didn't know what to do. Luckily, there were some private scholarships that allowed him to go to Duke University, so he could go to college, but it still didn't resolve his immigration status. And so he consulted a prominent immigration attorney in New York City who said, let's take a chance. There's a way that people like you at that time could get a green card if they could show that having to leave the United States would cause extreme hardship to the ones they were living with, i.e. his grandparents. And they went before an immigration judge and had a hearing, and actually his hearing was the last day of his final exams at Duke. And the immigration judge said, well, why are you here? He said, well, this is more important to me than graduating from college. I got an extension from my professor. So the judge said, fine, I grant you this cancellation of removal. You get your green card. So he graduated from Duke. He went on to medical school. And now he's an orthopedic surgeon in Connecticut. So he's very grateful, and his patients are obviously very grateful. So let's talk about another doctor now, one who's not in the book, but has an equally interesting immigration story. Dr. Srisatish Devapatla is a neonatologist here at Hugo Medical Center. He was born in India, trained here, and it took you 12 years, didn't it, to get your green card? So why don't you talk about your own green card experience?
I have been in this country for 18 years, and I went through so many ups and downs, and so difficult to... I promised Steve that I'm going to limit myself to, say, 5 minutes. So difficult to contain. So I thought maybe I should just come up with a script here. So I'll just read it out here. To be born in a family with meager means and brought up in a remote rustic place in South India, I set a seemingly impossible goal to be a successful physician in the United States. In 1994, against all odds, I arrived in the US with $120 in hand and huge debt back home. I quickly realized that coming to US was just a baby step. I'm a neonatologist. towards my goal. I would like to share one of the most difficult episodes of my life. That is life in New Haven, Connecticut. I worked at a 24-hour gas station for $3 an hour to survive and to apply for various residency programs. Coming from India, where the average temperature was 100 to 110 in South India. 17 snowstorms, walking a mile in freezing cold every day in the most dangerous neighborhoods in New Haven was tough. To add to that, I had to choose between eating a decent meal and save for a residency application fee. One day I was literally broke, had nothing to eat for the whole day. Desperate for money, I put my hand into the goose feather coat I bought from a flea market. Serendipitously, I felt a few coins in the seams of my coat. Using forceps, and thanks to my surgical skills, I made a 2-centimeter incision and pulled out 5 quarters. 5 minutes later, I had the best bowl of chili in my entire life. One of the things that happens during testing times is either you go strong in character and appreciate what you have, or give up and take shortcuts in life. I have to give a lot of credit to my parents and my wife for inspiring me to stay in course with character. May 1998, my wife, who was 6 months pregnant at that time, and I had to make a major decision which could change our lives forever. 1 month before finishing my pediatric residency, my dad became seriously ill. I was at the crossroads to decide between my lifelong goal to become a doctor in the United States and visiting my dad, who didn't have much time left. Because of the type of visa I had, if I went to India, there was no guarantee that I would come back. Despite my dad's disapproval to visit him, I went to India. Luckily, I was permitted to come back. But the incident that haunts me even today is the fact that I couldn't see him when he died because of the same visa situation and the word that I gave my dad that I will not risk my future again. That was when I really needed my green card. But 15 long years later, with numerous sacrifices made by me and my wife, I finally got the green card in December 2009. Thanks to Hugo Medical Center for all their efforts, and most importantly, Hillary Fraser, without whom I would have never gotten my green card. And thanks to you for giving me a chance to share my story.
Well, we'll include you in our secret. That's a great story. So let's go back to the book. This is a picture of Angela Andrade and her son. She was from Colombia, and there was an earthquake in 1995, I believe it was, in Colombia that devastated her small hometown. And she and her husband came to the United States on tourist visas because there's no way that they could survive in Colombia any farther. They had a tough go of it in the New York City area, just scraping by. They lived in the bathroom of somebody else's apartment for a while. Eventually, she found a job as a housekeeper for a couple in New Jersey, but she didn't know how to drive. And so her husband taught her how to drive literally the day before she started the job out there. But she became friends with a couple in New Jersey. She took care of their kids as well as her own kids. And that couple sponsored her for a green card under a special temporary category that allowed people who were here illegally to get their green cards without having to go back to their home country if they paid a penalty of $1,000. So now she has got her own green card, and her daughter is now going to college, which is one of her lifelong dreams. And it's one of the reasons and themes that we discovered when we were doing the book, is that people come to the United States for a variety of reasons, but a lot of times it's because of education. They want a better life for themselves by going to college, or they want their kids to have a better education than they could in their home country, and so that's why many of them want to come to the United States. Next we have Professor Michael Murga. He's a professor at MIT now. He got 3 green cards. He first came to the United States back in the 1980s and studied at University of Buffalo and got a PhD there. He's an engineer. He likes to figure out ways if people could be more green. And so, for example, after he got his PhD and he got his green card, he gave it up because he wanted to go back to Bilbao, Spain, and help the city government there figure out more strategic ways that people could decide whether they should take a bus to work or a car or the subway system there. So he gave up his first green card, but then he got an offer to come back to the United States to teach at MIT, and he got his second green card. But the way he got his second green card didn't allow his son, who was under 21 at the time, to also get a green card. So he gave that up and applied in another third way so that his son could also get a green card. So now he teaches at MIT, and there he is in his house with all his papers around him. Here we're starting to talk about people who are refugees. This is Peter Ajak. He's from South Sudan. He's one of the original lost boys of Sudan you may have read about. They wandered in Sudan for many years. He eventually made it to a refugee camp and then was resettled in Houston, Texas as a refugee. He became a security guard at a mall. And one day he was driving a fellow security guard home from work, and the fellow security guard left his gun in the car. He dropped his friend off. He was driving down the street. He got stopped by the local Houston police because he had a broken taillight. And when they searched his car, they discovered this gun, and he explained, well, it's not my gun, it's my friend's. But they didn't believe him, and they charged him with possessing an unlicensed firearm. And he pled guilty and went to jail for like 30 days. But because of that, he became deportable. So even though he had a green card, he was at risk of losing his green card over this sort of false arrest. So luckily, a prominent immigration attorney in Houston took his case on pro bono, but he was detained in immigration custody for over 8 months before it was finally resolved, and he was released from custody and he was able to retain his green card. Despite all that, he's still very happy he's here in the United States, and he now works as a paralegal at this Houston immigration law firm and hopes to become an immigration lawyer someday. Here we have somebody from North Sudan. This is Motaba M. He escaped being drafted into the Northern Army of Sudan in its bloody civil war, and he endured a similar harrowing journey to Peter Ajak, and he went first to a refugee camp in Kenya and then was resettled in Tampa, Florida. Like Dr. Devapatla, he really didn't have any money when he came to the United States. He worked a lot of odd jobs. He was trying to not only survive, but also save money for his family so they could resettle from a refugee camp in Kenya. And after about 5 years, finally, they were able to be resettled, and he got special permission to go down to the tarmac to meet his family on the plane, and the people brought a wheelchair with them because his mother was ailing. And when he saw his family for the first time in 5 years, he fainted, and he had to go into the wheelchair. He just graduated from dental school and is hoping to be a dentist and raise more money and help refugees in Sudan. Another type of refugee is this woman named Mary Peck. She was a child actress in Iran and was very prominent in Iran, but had to flee in 1979 when the Shah was overtaken by the people there. So she came to Los Angeles, but she really couldn't make it in Los Angeles as an actress because of the way people felt about Iran at the time. So she had to struggle for several years. She eventually decided to become a playwright and wrote several award-winning plays about women and how they're treated in the Middle East. One of them was put on at the Kennedy Center. So she had to reinvent herself in the United States, but is equally famous now as to when she originally came here. Another sort of refugee is Haider Abdullah. He was a person who was a boxer in Iraq, and because of his sort of background, he became a security guard for the U.S. military in Iraq. And one day, while he was escorting the U.S. military around Baghdad, there was a car bomb explosion, and he was blown up. And when I say blown up, I mean literally blown up. They thought he was dead. They took him to the morgue. His brother went to the morgue, and they realized he wasn't quite dead, so they pulled him out. But it took a lot of reconstructive surgery, and he was blinded, but eventually he was able to come to the United States as a refugee. After he came here, a doctor performed pro bono surgery on one of his eyes, so he has partial vision in one eye. And that's him holding his newborn son, relatively newborn son, who was born in the United States for like one of the first times ever. So he's struggling, even though he's here in the United States as a refugee in Florida, he's having a hard time surviving because there's very limited public benefits for refugees. But at least he's alive, at least he can see out of one eye, and at least he's here. This is Luis de la Cruz. He's from Mexico. He came with his family across the border, undocumented. His mother abandoned the family because she really couldn't stand the United States. The father was deported back to Mexico, so it was Luis and his younger brother who were basically living on their own, and this is the garage in which they were living. And he was helping himself and his younger brother get through high school. He was working a job as a file clerk at a local company, supporting himself illegally, and he didn't know how he was going to be able to legalize his status. He found out that there was a special way for kids who are orphaned, who are under 18, called special immigrant juvenile status, for them to be able to get a green card. And so but he had to have somebody help him out. So he approached his employer and said, I have to acknowledge that I am working illegally. The green card I showed you that was green, it's actually counterfeit. So the employer said, well, I have to fire you because of that, but I like you so much I'm going to sponsor you for this special immigrant juvenile status green card. So he now has a green card. He's now a senior at Arizona State University. He wants to become either a congressman or a lawyer. He worked for a congressman in D.C. last summer. And he's very motivated. He goes around Arizona talking about something called the DREAM Act, which is a way that people like himself can get legalized if Congress were to pass this bill. So he's sort of a success story there. Switching gears, let's talk about getting a green card based on love. And Alessio, you got your green card based on marriage. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that came about in your life in the United States?
Is it okay if I stand up?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm a little nervous because, I normally don't talk more than about 5-6 people, all my life. But first of all, I want to thank you very much for being here and your support. What can I say? I think I consider myself very lucky and grateful to be in this wonderful country that every day I call home, and it is my home for the past 33 years or so. Who would have ever imagined that this little boy growing up on the foothill of the Alps in Italy, in a very remote little village there with my sheep and my goats, that I would ever, come into this wonderful country and achieve so much. I can only summarize it as saying that all my dreams really came true by being here. As I said, I come from a very, very small village up in Italy, and there is really not much there to look forward to. But for some reason, I had this dream that I kept alive, that eventually someday I will go in a place that would be very special in life. And so happens that I was about 9-year-old when we had this tragedy, I could say, about the missile crisis, the Cuban missile crisis there. So they were talking about 3 particular people at that time there. Our president, which was John Kennedy, and on the other hand, the enemy was Khrushchev. And they were talking about the missile crisis and what is going to happen. It was very uncertain what is going to be the future. But myself, being a little boy, we were listening to this radio that was the size of this table at that time. And it was a Radio Praga, a radio from Prague, you know, and it was kind of half English, half Slovakian, and so on. And we made things, you know, out of what was happening around the world. And I was just thinking about, I said, I don't know what is going to happen, but I would really like to keep this dream alive, and I would like to go in my life where, you know, the other side of the waters, we used to say ourselves, the other side of the water, which is, you know, the ocean, and that is the United States. And I really kept, you know, this dream alive, you know, in me, and as I grew a little bit, I had access to go to work to Switzerland, in Zurich, that my parents were working there for several years of their lives. And year after year was a job in a hotel. It was very simple. My job was a night porter because I knew a couple of languages besides Italian. I knew some Slovenian and a little bit of German and a little bit of Spanish. So that helped me a great deal. And they were hiring students every year for a couple of months. There is, you know, vacation, school vacation time. And turns out that one day I met this wonderful, beautiful lady, and I didn't know much English except for maybe a few words of the Beatles. I want to hold your hand. It wasn't much, but it was a good start. And I fell madly in love with her, and this was a big opening, a big step in my life, and eventually we married, and we decided to come into the States. I would have never imagined that it's going to be this wonderful and great for me. It seems that my life since I came here, which is about 33 years ago, it's been absolutely wonderful. There is so many dreams, challenges every day that I cannot describe. I could just say to you guys, to summarize it again, that all my dreams came true and I couldn't hope for more. And at this day, I make a lot of trips to Italy to visit my mom. She's 80-years-old now. And every time I go to Italy, it's so nice to give her a hug and to see her and a few friends that I have left. But the best part is always when I come back, and I come back home, here in America, where I live, where my life is, and where I'm happy. So I thank you very much for being here, for your support, and this is the most wonderful place to be. Thank you.
So that's one love story, and people frequently think that getting a green card based on marriage is the best way to get a green card because we don't have numerical quotas or backlogs, and so therefore you can get it relatively quickly. But it's not always easy to get a green card that way. This is a woman named Nellie Boyett from Peru. She came to the United States, overstayed her visa, was working in a flea market in Florida. And that, next to her, is her now husband named Jeff. He was a native Floridian. He used to walk around the flea market with a boombox on his hand saying, "Speak English." He didn't like immigrants. But, you know, he sort of fell in love with Nellie, and he was shy at first. They used to go out on dates, and eventually decided to get married. After they got married, they immediately filed for a green card. They didn't realize that the immigration authorities would not believe that their marriage was bona fide, that it was legitimate. And it took them 4 years and several interviews to go back and prove through various documents that indeed they did marry for love and not simply so that Nellie could get a green card. But eventually, through the help of a good pro bono attorney in Florida, they were able to convince the immigration authorities. They got their green card, and now Nellie runs a specially big stall at the flea market, and Jeff helps her out at the flea market, and they're very happy. The last story from our book I want to share with you is Jack Jalad, who is here on the left, and his lifelong partner, Doug Hauer on the right. Jack is from Canada, and he came to the United States, to Boston, to go to dental school, where he fell in love with Doug. But they couldn't get married in the United States, so they went back to Ontario, where they did get married legally under Canadian law. But that marriage was not recognized, and still is not recognized under U.S. immigration law. So it's not a way that Jack would be able to get a green card. So luckily for him, because he became dentist, there's a theme here about dentists, by the way. We were sponsored by the American Dental Association. He was able to get a green card based on his employment, so he was able to stay in the United States. And that's them with their parakeets in their house near Boston. But still, people like them cannot get green cards through same-sex marriages. Just this week, however, a class action lawsuit was started, and hopefully they'll convince a federal court that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional as applied to same-sex marriages. So we'll see how that goes. So to wrap it up, why don't we have Sue Chaffee talk. Sue runs the Immigrant Services Program here at Ithaca's Catholic Charities, and she's in the trenches every day helping people get green cards and become naturalized U.S. citizens, and she always has interesting stories to tell. Sue?
So I've been debating on what story to tell, because I have a lot. I have a lot of interesting clients. Just like both these gentlemen alluded to, there's a lot of bumps in the road, but I'm going to talk about my newest green card holder that came in my office just this past month, and I got a letter the other day saying her green card was being mailed by USCIS. Her mother came in 2005 through family reunification, kind of chain migration. She had come from Cambodia, where her family members had already come to the United States as refugees. And they finally petitioned for her. When her visa was available, she came to the United States, leaving a 9-year-old daughter in Cambodia for her sister to raise until she could afford to bring her here. So 5 years later, she applied for citizenship, and I helped her through that process. And when she became naturalized, I asked her, bring in the paperwork about your daughter, because then we can let them know that you're a U.S. citizen, and that'll speed up the process for her to come. So she came with all this, kind of mess of paperwork, and I'm trying to sit through it, seeing, what's the status on this case? And there's pretty much a notice saying you didn't respond to our request for evidence, so this case is more or less closed. So in talking to her, I tried to figure out, well, it looks like they were asking you for her birth certificate. Did you ever send it? So she was finally able to communicate. I gave it to the woman. I gave it to the social worker. And I'm like, well, who's the social worker? And it turned out it was a staff worker at American Civic Association in Binghamton. And I called American Civic, and I said, who would she be talking about? And he said that was one of the women that was killed in the massacre. So along with all of her, the woman dying, all those files went with her. They were electronic files. He was new to the job, and those cases just kind of, I don't know if all of them fell through the cracks, but they fell through the cracks. So I was able to, contact the National Visa Center, wrote a letter explaining what had happened with this caseworker, and asked for this case to be reopened, and could we respond to this request for evidence. So 2 years later, it finally took, because she had to have DNA testing on this end, there had to be DNA testing on that end. The daughter didn't understand that, so she never related it to the mother. I'm waiting for the visa to come through, and there was no visa, so I had Congressman Hinchy's office make an inquiry, and they said, well, we told this young woman 8 months ago to get DNA tested. So finally, she's here. So she came 6 weeks ago, and like I said, her green card should be either in the mail or she should have received it by now. So that's just an example of some that we have in Ithaca, and one of the cases that I do.
You had an interesting Tier 3 case recently too, right?
Yes, so we have a lot of Burmese in the community, refugees from Burma, and a lot of them, they adjust their status without any problem. 5 years later, they go on to become U.S. citizens, but there's some Burmese that have been caught in what's called, their cases are put on hold because of something called TRIG. And TRIG it stands for Terrorist-Related Inadmissibility Grounds. And they're saying, the U.S. government, after 9/11, kind of put out this sweeping law that if you participated in anything that had to do with terrorist-related activities, then you couldn't adjust your status in the United States. So even if somebody in Burma participated in a pro-democracy movement, and fought against the regime of the oppressive military. They were granted refugee status. They told their tale when they got into the refugee camp and kind of had to say exactly what they did. But then now they're in the United States, and they're placed on this terrorist watch list. And so some of the Burmese and Burmans and Karen in our community, and not only here, but Utica, Syracuse, Buffalo, other cities in upstate New York, their cases have been put on hold. So I had a client that came to the U.S. in 2002, and in order to get into the camp, he had been fighting, and he actually got shrapnel in his head and had to have surgery and had a traumatic brain injury as a result. So him and his 3 children were resettled into the United States. And to live here, he had to go on SSI. And as a refugee, you do qualify for SSI. Unlike if you just come in as a new immigrant with a green card, you don't qualify until you do working quarters. So he's on SSI, but he applies for his green card, and the case, he just got a response in the mail saying, it's not being approved, you can be deported. So the government then made a change. USCIS looked at some of these cases and said, well, we can't really deport them, but the law hadn't been really defined yet. So they said, we're going to put these cases on hold. And that's where a lot of these cases moved to, including his. So when you talk to the clients, you're saying, well, you're not deported, so it's not real bad, but it is on hold. And what they're seeing in this letter is, I'm a terrorist. And they're like, I fought against this government. Here I'm in the United States. So we fast forward to 2009, 2010. He finally gets a letter from SSI saying you no longer qualify for SSI because you've had it so many years and you have to have citizenship. So he had come to me saying, where's my green card? And I'd never heard of any of this trig stuff. I'd never heard of, a case being on hold. Unlike my other client, he didn't even have, a folder full of paperwork. He had nothing. So I had to try to figure out where did he get resettled from. I tracked it down to Catholic Charities in Houston, Texas. They sent me the paperwork. I was able to look at what his current status was on the USCIS website and see that he is on hold, and just kind of did my research from there. I talked to people who are really experts in this area and tried to get his case looked at. And at the same time, other clients were popping up. I was getting calls from Utica. I was getting calls from somebody came in my office here whose citizenship application was put on hold. So we started to do advocacy in this area, and we worked with Human Rights First in Washington, trying to collect these stories, get them to Janet Napolitano's attention. And while we were doing this, she finally did take off one of these Burmese groups. And the group is the All-Burmese Student Democratic Front. And prior to that, other groups that were from Burma, like the Karen National Union, there was a couple of Karen and Chin pro-democracy movements were taken off. But there's still a large number on them on there. And so these cases are on hold. I have other people in contact with me, similar to the first client I spoke about. Their SSI is running out, and they really have, there's public assistance, a safety net, but that takes your income down to $300. And he's like, how can I support myself on $300? So my client, he did get the exemption. I asked for the case to be expedited. The green card came within 3 months. And then I worked with Buffalo to get his naturalization case expedited. And all along I had this clock ticking in my head. 8 months he has left. And 8 months to that day, he finally became naturalized as a U.S. citizen. And I was able to take the paperwork to the Social Security Administration. And so he said, as long as I have that, I have, my food, I'm fine. I don't need to go anywhere. I don't need to buy anything. But that's just kind of a case how they've gotten caught up in what goes on with the government, and just how, just living with that kind of stress and anxiety that is this going to change? And so there are still people out there that are on, have their cases on hold. So.
That's a good example of how complicated our immigration system is. So when you hear radio talk show hosts saying, these people should just get legal, they should just go through the legal system, they don't realize how complicated the legal system is. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this book, is to personalize the immigration debate, to encourage people to write Congress about why we need to reform our immigration laws. And we hope that this evening has been one step in that process. So with that, we've got a few minutes. Why don't we open it up for any questions that you might have, either about the book or about the life experiences here of our panelists.
What have you learned from this process?
So the question is, what did I learn from doing this book? I learned a lot of things. I learned about some of the compelling stories of people and why people, despite all the difficulties in the United States these days, people still want to come here because it's still so much better than other countries. And how much more they can do in the United States than they could in their home country, despite the problems we have in our own country. So it gave me actually a renewed sense of optimism that despite our problems, we're still in a great country. And if that many people want to come here, I want to help them achieve their goals. Yes?
Has there been any shift in the last few years when we went from having the Bush administration to the Obama administration?
The question is whether there's been a shift in the administration between Bush and Obama, and the answer is unfortunately not. And I think Obama personally supports comprehensive immigration reform, but because of the intractability of Congress, you can't get anything done through Congress these days. That initiative has stalled. I think he's hoping that if he wins re-election, then there'll be an opportunity in 2013 to maybe do something on a lot of different fronts. But there'll be a lot of legislative proposals battling for attention in Congress, so I'm not sure that even then we'll be able to really enact comprehensive immigration reform. Yes, way in the back.
Were any of the people in the book able to navigate the immigration process on their own?
So the question is whether were any of the people able to navigate the system on their own. Some of the refugees came in, but again, even they were, resettled by Catholic Charities or the Lutherans or Hias and others. I can't think of any right now who actually did not even need an immigration lawyer, because most of them had various problems, so they sought advice of either Catholic Charities or a legal counsel. Yes?
Steve, you make immigration lawyers, especially pro bono immigration lawyers, out to be the nearest thing we've got to angels of mercy. Would you recommend that a lot more people go to law school?
Absolutely. I'm recruiting for Cornell Law School. No, I think in any area of law you can do a lot of good. You can do a lot of good in landlord-tenant law and help people that way. It's just that in this particular case, I think that immigration is the deeply personal kind of law, and I think all of us immigration lawyers like to help people, whether we do it for pay or, in these cases, for pro bono purposes. Yes?
Could you speak to the issue of amnesty? I wish there were a better word, but that's the one we got for people who are undocumented.
Right. The question is, what should we do about the 11.5 million people in the United States who are here in undocumented status? About half of those actually did enter the United States legally on some kind of temporary visa, but overstayed. The other half of them crossed the border illegally, mostly from Mexico, but some from Canada. I think most politicians, except those on the far right, would agree that there's no way we're going to deport all of those people. We don't have the resources, we don't have the money, so the question is what to do about them. And I think that there could be a consensus eventually saying we should regularize their status. Even Republicans have said, maybe they need to get to the back of the line, but at least we'll put them in a line so eventually they could get their green card if they pay a penalty fee, if they learn English, if they have a job, etc. So I think that if common sense can prevail in Congress, we may eventually have a legalization program. We had one in 1986, and I think it's unfortunately time for another one. One last question, and then we'll call it a night. Yes?
What's the cost to obtain a green card?
What's the cost to gain a green card? It's, what's the word for MasterCard? Priceless. It depends a lot. The filing fees alone have gone up a lot. Sue, what does it cost to file just for naturalization?
Naturalization is $680.
$680 just to file the petition with the immigration agency, and then whatever it costs to work with Sue or other people to get legal advice as to how to do it properly. Some of the application fees can cost $2,000 or $3,000 plus whatever an immigration lawyer may have to charge. So it's not an easy or inexpensive process, but still over 1 million people get green cards each year. So that, I want to thank all of you for coming out on this night to learn a little bit. I want to thank my wife, Amy. Yes, for helping me organize this. Shannon Bush, where's Shannon? Is she here? Oh, there's Shannon. Thank you very much for organizing this. For everybody else who's saying the name of our panelists who came out and volunteered their time. I'd like to all to you. So thank you very much. We've got food and refreshments out there. We've got books for signing. And $10 of every purchase tonight will go to Immigrant Services Program at Catholic Charities. So if you're doing a good deed by buying a book.